Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about downward facing dog. Now you will hear it referred to probably 99% of the time as down dog. And it's really just a time-saving feature. When you're in a flow, you'll hear down dog pretty much most of the time. But the pose is actually downward facing dog. So that's what we're going to discuss. Now, downward facing dog is an inversion where basically you are going to be in a inverted V position with your feet here, your bum here, and your head here. So before we start getting into that inversion, I just want to talk about the shoulders a little bit, because what happens a lot of the time when you're in this inversion, you automatically get into what I call turtleneck. Turtleneck is when your shoulders scrunch up into your ears. This is what I call a turtleneck. And when you get into downward facing dog, that's probably one of the things that will happen for many of you. So once we start talking about down dog, I want you to be mindful of this. So basically, your arms will be over your head, but what I want you to avoid is this scrunching in. We don't really want this in a down dog. We want arms extended, but we also want our shoulders down. So you're depressing or kind of pushing your shoulders towards your bum. Yes, makes sense? So I'm going down with my shoulders as my arms are reaching. Now, in a sit position, we've talked about this in a different video. It's very similar to when you take your hands up over your head, crescent lunge, any of the warriors. Again, you want to avoid that. My arms are going up, yes. So you want to avoid the scrunchy feeling. In a sit position, it's much easier to control that. And when you get into down dog, it's going to be a little tricky. So again, just be mindful of that. So once we start getting into that, I'll be mentioning shoulders away from the ears. You'll hear me say that a lot. So basically, you want to draw your shoulders away from your ears as best as you can. Yes? Now, down dog, it's a spine lengthener. So many times in down dog, we're so obsessed about getting our heels to the floor, Yes, it is one of the things that we want to accomplish. So yes, you work on your hamstrings, but first you want to work on lengthening your spine. So think of the top of your head to your tail. Remember we talked about in a previous video, if you were a puppy dog or a kitty cat and you had a tail, that tail is at your sacrum. And that is what is going to be pushing up towards the sky. So from your tail to the top of your head, that space, that's what you want to be lengthening first. And then we'll work on trying to extend the legs, getting into the hamstrings. So spine first, hamstrings second. Never try to do your hamstrings first, and I'll kind of show you some of the problems that you'll run into if you try to get into the hamstrings first and then your spine later. You'll have much more curving of the spine, and we want to kind of get it into that nice flat back. Yes? So, downward facing dog is again one of those poses where you can't actually mark on your mat. Okay, this is where my hands are going to be, this is where my feet are going to be, and that's my down dog. You're going to notice that space between your feet and your hands is going to change almost every single time you get into down dog. Almost every single time. Basically, it's going to change a lot. Now, the first way that you can get into your first down dog, and a good way to measure. Everybody says, well, where am I supposed to put my hands and where am I supposed to put my feet? A good way to measure your first one is from tabletop. So when you are in your tabletop, we know that Our hands are underneath our shoulders, and we're trying to get our knees underneath our hips. Now again, this is a good start. So once you get there, we know how to set up our tabletop. Our shoulders are away from the ears. We're kind of pushing our shoulder blades towards each other down the back. We're grounding into our hands and tucking the toes under. And the first thing that you can use as your measurement is trying to lift your knees up off the floor. So again, you'll probably have to take a couple of breaks when you're doing this, but eventually it'll become smoother and it'll become kind of second nature to get from tabletop into downward facing dog. So basically, we take our inhale to lengthen the front side of the body, and with our exhale, we're going to lift our knees. And then once we continue, we're going to keep that deep bend in our knee, and we are going to start shifting our bum back and up until we can get a nice long line. Now, as I'm working, I'm pushing my shoulders from over my hands to behind my hands. Yes, you can see the angle of my arm. I'm pushing my tail up towards the sky, and I'm still keeping a relatively deep bend in my knees. So this is how you are going to start lifting your tail up towards the sky into down dog. Now right away you might notice, okay, I'm in my tabletop, I've tucked my toes under, I've set everything up, I've taken my exhale and I start shifting, and it's like right away your feet might want to naturally start adjusting and moving. So I'd like to push my tail up towards the sky, trying to get a nice long line from my hand up to my tail. And once I actually get that line, then I'm going to see what's going on with my legs. If I can keep that nice long line and feel that I have space, then I'm going to start shifting my heels down towards the floor. That's going to be your hamstring extension. Now, what happens many times is as soon as you start lifting your bum, that whole turtleneck starts to happen. Yes? So these are common problems. Here's my tabletop, my toes are tucked, and then I start to scrunch, and I'm all scrunched up here, and then I'm like, okay, I want to get my legs long, and then I find that I'm curved. I hope you can see a nice big curve in my spine, which is not what we want. So again, shoulders away from the ears. As I exhale, I'm going to push back. And if you've been in my class before, and if you've ever gotten an adjustment, imagine my hands around your waist, hip area, and I'm pulling you back. So I don't want to be in my down dog here. See how I'm coming forward? My shoulders are much closer over my hands. I want to push back. So I'm sticking my tail up towards the sky, and then my leg here, if I start off high in my heels, then I'm going to see if I have a little bit of space in my hamstrings to bring my heels a little bit closer to the floor. Now, some of you will be able to get your heels right to the floor. I cannot do that right away. I've mentioned it before. My ankles are tight. Oh, I knocked my microphone. Hopefully that didn't make too much of a sound. The ankle mobility, for me, is an issue. So for me to bring my heels all the way down to the floor, I have to shorten my stance. And I'm pretty sure that right now you see a curve in my spine. So yes, my legs are straight, my heels are to the floor, and I may think I'm in a good downward dog, but my spine is not in that optimal line. So for me, my modification is heels up a little bit so that I can lengthen my spine. Yes? I hope that makes sense. Now, people always say, okay, where's my head supposed to be in downward facing dog? Lots of opinions on this. Usually what happens for me is once I start I start my movement to get into downward facing dog, I'm looking around. Where am I looking? I'm looking around at my feet to make sure that my second toe is facing forward. I'd like to have a space between my feet so my feet are hip bone distance. Most people cannot manage feet together. If you go too wide, we can get into a wide downward facing dog, but for today's tutorial, I'm just going to talk about the hip bone distance. So as I'm kind of making my way, I'm looking, which usually means my head is kind of hanging down, which if you remember when we talked about the cervical part of our spine, now I'm not in a good position. So think about lining up I'm going to come down a little bit, your ear with your bicep. So imagine having your ears between your bicep. Yeah? Not so much hanging down here, because then I got this really funky angle here in my cervical spine, and right away you can kind of... And what we're trying to do is create space. So I won't kid you, downward facing dog is not exactly easy. There's a lot of business going on. You're holding your body weight, you're in an inversion, you got to work on your shoulders, you got to work on there's a lot of stuff going on. So at first, it's going to be, holy moly, this is hard. I can't do it. I can't hold my weight. I need to take a break. So you take a break. You come into your down dog. Especially if you're doing this video, you probably have already taken a couple of breaks. Eventually, you're going to notice that you're going to build some stamina. You're going to build some strength. And you will feel as ease in downward facing dog as you do here in hero pose or in your child's pose or any other relatively easy position. You'll notice that eventually you can use your down dog as your rest pose. That may not happen for you right away. You might be sitting there going, what's she talking about? She's crazy. Downward facing dog is not a rest pose. It will be eventually. When that eventual is, I don't know, I can't really guarantee that for you, but it will. I promise it will. I just can't promise you when. So eventually you'll get into the stage in your yoga practice where the shoulders soft away from the ears, the spine is lengthened, the heel is closer to the floor by a little bit more. You get the length in the hamstrings, and you'll be able to breathe freely there. You'll be able to rest. Yes? So, common problems. From my tabletop, as I'm coming up into my downward facing dog, a common problem is I leave my hands underneath my shoulders and then I try to stick my bum up. So this is closer to a plank position, which is what we will be talking about in our probably the next video. So my shoulders need to move back. Another common problem is keeping my legs straight, but then not being able to get that spine in a nice long line. So feel free, give yourself permission to bend your knees as much as you possibly need to get length in your spine, shoulders away from your ears as best as you can. Your ears as close to between your biceps as you possibly can, and then work on that heel towards the floor. So you might even notice when we're practicing your first 5, 10, however many downward facing dogs look like this with a very generous bend in your knee. And then as we progress into our flow, you're going to notice, maybe I can even lengthen the stance, the distance between my hands and my feet. So, too close. This is a very short downward facing dog, and I hope you can see how my spine is curved. And we might use this, for example, as you're getting into, let's say, a handstand. You're prepping your body to kind of take the weight out of the feet and into the hands. And again, that's a more advanced pose, and we certainly won't be doing that in the near future. But shortening that distance between the hands and the feet, a very short down dog, is probably making your way into something else. So have that distance between your feet and your hands relatively long so that you can try to stick the bum up, lengthen the spine, and have those shoulders moving away from the ears. So try not to be all scrunched up. This is what many times, I see this many times in class, this is what people think a down dog should look like. And that's really uncomfortable. Like, just showing you here is really uncomfortable. So I want to, I'm pushing my underarm pits down towards the floor. I'm sticking my tail up towards the sky. I have strong hands into the floor. I have strong feet. And I'm trying to breathe. So your downward facing dog, down dog for short, is something that you will notice is going to change for you within your little practice from whenever you come to your mat. If we're doing a flow and we do a down dog at the beginning and then a little bit later we do another down dog, you're going to notice a pretty big difference as you create that length in your spine, lengthen your hamstrings. So down dog at first is not going to be easy. I'll tell you that. It's not going to be easy at first, but eventually you'll get the strength in your shoulders to be able to support you. You'll have the strength in your legs to be able to support you, where this will be a rest pose. I promise. So that's it for talking about downward facing dog. And what I would like to start putting is downward facing dog into our flows. Up to now, we've been coming back to mountain pose quite a bit, and I want to start incorporating down dog into our flows. So don't worry if you notice that it's a little bit beyond your capability right at this moment. Start working on it with little baby pieces. So if we're doing something, let's say in our flow, and we're holding downward facing dog for a little bit longer than you can hold it for, and you need a break, I'm pretty sure you can figure it out. However, I'll remind you, if we're doing something in downward facing dog and you notice that you're dying a miserable death and you need a break, all you have to do is come forward. Come back to your tabletop. Take a little 2-second breather. And if we're still in downward facing dog, then you come back. And if you need a break again, you take your break. So know that eventually you're going to be able to hold your downward facing dog for a fair amount of time. And you won't really get all that fatigued. You will at the beginning as you're starting to work on it. So work on holding it for 2 seconds. And then if you notice if you need a break, okay, fine. Next time maybe I can hold it for 5 seconds. And gradually more and more and more. You get the idea. So that's a little bit about setting up our downward facing dog, down dog for short, And we are going to start putting that into our flows. You will probably see downward facing dog in every flow that we do. So that's it for today, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.